Welcome to Highland Waves, a podcast coming to you from Marshbrook Studios, situated on the bank of the world-famous Margaree River in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. At Highland Waves, we feature stories about the people, the places, and the visitors to Inverness County. I'm Pat Wall, your host. This morning, my guest is Bill Haley. Welcome to Highland Waves, Bill.
Thank you, Pat.
Bill is past president of the Margaree Salmon Association, a volunteer not-for-profit organization devoted to the enhancement, protection, and conservation of Atlantic salmon and trout in the Margaree watershed here in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. This morning we will concentrate our discussion on Atlantic salmon, an iconic species that is struggling to maintain its place in a changing world. Bill, you are a Cape Bretoner?
I am.
Born and raised?
I am.
So you're no stranger to Atlantic salmon.
No, I've been enjoying angling for Atlantic salmon since the early 80s, actually.
Okay. So what are some of the earliest memories of yours with respect to Atlantic salmon?
Well, one angling memories, one of my favorite memories is an evening fishing with my son when I was fishing at the Tompkins pool, and immediately below the pool, my son was fishing next to the island there. And I hooked a big fish, and the fish went downstream on one side of the island, and I was fighting that fish. And I called over to my son, "Can you come over and help me?" He said, "I can't, Dad, I have a fish on too." So, it's not that often you get to fish with a friend or a son and fight a fish at the same time on the river.
Yeah, that's quite unique.
Yeah.
Many of our listeners are familiar with the name Atlantic salmon, but really don't know a great deal about it. So perhaps you can briefly give us an idea of the life cycle of an Atlantic salmon.
Well, an Atlantic salmon is quite an interesting fish, and it's a fish that, humans think, or scientists may think they understand what that type of fish needs or doesn't need, or does or doesn't do, but the fish is just an unbelievable species. It will come into the freshwater streams like the Margaree anytime from the spring to the fall. It'll spawn in the Margaree and up in the tributaries. After spawning, most of those fish will spend the winter in the river and then go back out to the sea in the spring. Unlike our Pacific salmon, they do not die after they spawn. So they can be repeat spawners, and they just get larger and larger and more effective at spawning and efficient at spawning. The eggs that are laid, they overwinter, and in the spring they become fry, small little fish, probably an inch long when you see them, and they will spend up to 3 to 4 years in the river and in the streams, the tributaries in particular, until they become what is referred to as a smolt. As they're growing, you look at them, you might think you call them a minnow, but they're referred to as pairs, and after they get to a certain weight, not very big, maybe 4 inches, 5 inches long, what happens is they smoltify. So in the spring, they'll get very silvery, and they'll go out to the ocean. Now that little fish will find its way all the way out to Greenland and spend 1, 2, maybe 3 winters feeding there. If it comes back after 1 winter, it's referred to as a grouse. It's a small 3.5 to 5 pound fish. If it comes back after 2 winters, it'll probably be around 10 to 12 pounds. In 3 winters, it'll be 15 or more pounds. And once it comes back, it keeps going on with the cycle. It'll come in the spring, the summer, the fall, and again it will spawn, and the cycle just continues.
Amazing fish. Most rivers in Atlantic Canada had a population of Atlantic salmon at one time. Some populations have disappeared, and others, of course, have dwindled. Can you talk about some of the reasons why we've got some rivers without fish and some rivers still have some fish?
I'd say it's a number of things, like habitat destruction is one of the main culprits. Like whether it's clear cutting to the water's edge in the past, or heavy industry, pulp mills on rivers. It can be a number of things, but what I'm looking at and what I'm mentioning is what man has done to the river, or various rivers. The other aspect that we're seeing now is climate change. We're seeing very warm, low water during the summer, and even into the fall. This year we had low water right into the end of October, which is the end of the salmon season. So that certainly has an impact on the fish as well. Overfishing in the past, commercial fishing with nets strung out from shore and fishing in the high seas, certainly was destructive to the salmon populations. And lastly, it's still a mystery. Where are smolt going? Where the little fish go out in the springtime. For every 100 fish that went out, would probably get maybe 4 or 5 back. And now, in many instances, you're lucky to get 1 back. So there's still the mystery of what's going on at the high seas.
The Margaree Salmon Association was born in 1982 to help the salmon in the Margaree watershed through enhancement, conservation, and protection practices. Perhaps you can expand on each one of those and how it works here on the river.
Well, here on the river, back to 1982, I should mention that the association was formed by both local people, some anglers, most anglers, but other individuals as well. They may have been farmers, fishermen, and folks from away. Like it was a joint collaboration to form the Margaree Salmon Association, as it still is today. Many of our members are from outside of the province and outside of the country. The main driving force of the Margaree Salmon Association, our executive and our directors, are typically locally from Cape Breton, many right from the Margarees, and that is a welcome aspect because we have people that are familiar with the area, and we're growing a corporate memory as well locally. The aspect of conserving and working on the environment to help enhance the salmon populations on the Margaree, that's been going on for many, many years. I'd say in the late 80s, a lot of the in-stream work began in partnership with the Nova Scotia Salmon Association. We are very big on partnerships. We really enjoy working with other groups that have like interests in conservation. Back to the Nova Scotia Salmon Association, what collaboration with them looks like is they are very helpful for us in working in tributaries. We have a crew of 4 individuals who work for us every summer. The Nova Scotia Salmon Association worked with the Department of Environment so that our crew and other crews can be certified to do work in salmon habitat. They can put structures in streams, especially in tributaries, and it's something we like to really focus on, tributaries. We feel that if there's no nursery for small fish, then we're not going to have big fish in the river. In the tributaries, you don't have mergansers and fish ducks, you don't have seals typically, you don't have striped bass, so there's some protection in those small tributaries where salmon need to grow. We also do a lot of work with the local salmon hatchery, the fish hatchery here in Margaree. Fish hatchery has been on this river since 1902. They do excellent work. They release probably close to 150 to 200,000 salmon every year into the river. And it's funny, many people think, well, that hatcheries do not work to help the salmon population. But if you look anecdotally, we have a salmon population that's quite healthy on our river. It's met escapement for decades after decades, and we're also the only river that has a salmon hatchery on it in the province. So I think it's more than just happenstance that's occurring. And when we look at our hatchery, it's not a highly mechanized factory. It is still run by the Department of Inland Fisheries and Aquaculture. All of the tasks are done manually. The water that's used is water that's going into the river. The pens are all different colored bottoms. The current is varied. Like, so much of what they're doing at our hatchery is what's now being called cutting edge in the UK. It's like what's old is new again.
My understanding is that when the fish are released from the hatchery, they're marked, like fin clipped, so that when they do return to the river, you can distinguish those fish from the wild fish. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's another aspect of what we're involved in. There are many hatcheries out west that all of these tasks are mechanized, but here the adipose fin, which is between the dorsal and the tail fin on the top of the small salmon parent smolt, that has to be clipped off manually with a little pair of surgical scissors. So if you can imagine holding a small fish that's not much bigger than a minnow, might be 4 or 5 inches long, and clipping that adipose fin, and doing that 200 to 250,000 times over the winter, it's quite a task. But the hatchery is well connected with the community, and they get volunteers from various groups, and we have volunteers that work with the hatchery. Greg Lovely spends a lot of time helping out at the hatchery, and the other thing, we have a new hatchery manager there, Jamie Valance, and he's really seems to be doing an excellent job there, recruiting volunteers, maintaining the hatchery, obtaining funds to upgrade the hatchery. You know, like we're very supportive of the Margaree hatchery.
Yeah, you mentioned Greg Lovely, and for our listeners, Greg Lovely is a retired dentist who moved to Margaree some 10 years ago, and he is Mr. Hatchery. Whenever you go by, usually Greg is around. Although the Margaree Salmon Association is a volunteer not-for-profit organization, you must have other help to do the work that you do.
Yes, we do. Like, for example, this year, we had a staff of 7 over the summer. But when we look at staff, something that has made a big difference in the Margaree Salmon Association, what we are accomplishing these days is thanks to our technical person. We refer to him as a coordinator. Aaron Allen joined us almost 3 years ago now. He's full-time with us. He's really expanded our work in science work in the watershed, and really expanded our work in relationship building. This year we had projects on the river that were from the University of Windsor in Ontario, Dalhousie University, and all of that work really contributes to knowing what's going on in your watershed. If you like, I could say a few words on some of those projects.
Give us an example of one, at least.
Okay, for example, Robert Lennox from the Dalhousie University, he's a doctor, and he has master students working for him, and what they're doing is they're putting radio tags in adult salmon that are coming into the watershed, and they'll be doing that, or they've done that all summer and fall. And the reason for that is they're tracking the salmon into the highlands of Cape Breton, up in the sanctuary, both in the river and the tributaries, to see exactly what habitat those salmon, the adult salmon, are using for spawning. And they're radio tags, so there's a receiver that Margaree Salmon Association helped them install up at the border of the sanctuary, and the fishable part of the river. And they also have a handheld receiver. And our technician, Aaron Allen, will be going up with Robert Lennox into the highlands, and they'll be going into the tributaries and along the river with the handheld tracker just to locate those salmon. We do quite a bit of work up in the highlands. For example, next weekend, two of our staff will be going in there with camping gear. They'll be going high into the Margaree watershed, up to the source of the Margaree just about, and they're bringing with them all of their camping equipment and all of their science equipment in waterproof bags, and they'll be snorkeling down, believe it or not, this time of year, but they'll be snorkeling down from the source of the Margaree all the way down the river to count the salmon that are in the river this time of year. So you're talking a snorkeling of probably 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers. So it'll be a few nights. So they plan on camping along the river, and they have their gear in waterproof bags. Their gear will actually be traveling with them. And that's another interesting aspect of what we're doing in partnership with the University of Dalhousie University.
That's wonderful. As time evolves, more changes are presented to salmon. And the bigger ones lately, it seemed to be, and you mentioned it earlier, it was climate change and global warming. And maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit about what's happening here, at least in the last 10 years, in the water course and the water temperatures, etc.
Well, I think the major thing that has happened here in the Margarees over the last, we'll say, 5 or 6 years to try and cope with climate change and warming water was the establishment of a warm water protocol that will allow for the closing of the river when the water is too warm. If the water is above 20 degrees and you angle salmon, the salmon can be really exhausted when you release them, and the potential for that salmon to die increases. So, we really focused on that. Department of Fisheries, the Federal Department of Fisheries, the Unamaki Institute of Natural Resources, the Nova Scotia Inland Fisheries and Aquaculture, Atlantic Salmon Federation, Nova Scotia Salmon Association, and the Margaree Salmon Association all convened meetings to try to address this. With Alan Dwyer's leadership from the Department of Fisheries, we managed to establish a warm water protocol that will allow for the river to be closed in certain instances. For example, this year, the water temperature reached a certain threshold in July, and 2/3 of the river was closed to angling, and it didn't reopen until September. So that protected the fish that were coming into the watershed from potentially being angled and dying really from exhaustion.
How does the Margaree Salmon Association and your partners know what they're doing is the right thing?
Well, we depend very much on science. For example, if we're looking at habitat restoration in the small tributaries, we have professionals coming in to give us advice. Plus, we have our crew of 4, all certified so that they are qualified to do the work that they're doing. If we're doing work in the main river, well, then we have to hire an engineer and a habitat specialist who do this by trade. They're professionals. They know what they're doing. They're trained. It's not like me going out saying, well, there's some erosion, we should put a rock there. They will go there. They will do the drawings. They will see the potential of success, and they'll give us advice what areas we potentially could work in and what areas would be a waste of time. There's parts of the river that are in transition. They're going to change dramatically, either annually or over the next few years, depending on high water events. There are other parts of the river that the bank could protect it. You could keep silt out of the river and keep the spawning beds free of silt so that the salmon have gravel. And, we go by the professionals' advice when it comes to doing work like that.
And most of that work is also to do with providing cold water refuge for the salmon.
Very much so. Like if we look at the recent work we did at the swimming hole pool, that's a very deep pool. It's 15, 20 feet deep. It's a perfect refuge during the warm weather for salmon, and it has the Lake Ola Brook coming in at the head of the pool, which provides cold water for that pool. So it's a really cold water refuge. That project, it was done over 2 years, and we partnered with the Unamaki Institute of Natural Resources, the Nova Scotia Salmon Association, and the Inverness Municipality. All three of those groups contributed funds and time to work with us and do that habitat restoration.
Overall, it seems, at least in my opinion, and from a symposium I just attended in Moncton a couple of weeks ago, that partnerships are really important and they seem to be working well. And my takeaway from the discussions that took place at that symposium was the Margaree Salmon Association is sort of a leader in that, if not at the top, but pretty close, in getting people together, working to enhance the watersheds of the province, not just the Margaree watershed, but Shattycamp, for example, etc.
Yes, like we really enjoy working with other groups, and it really enhances the work that we want to accomplish. We all have different skills, we all have different finances, we all have different contacts both with NGOs and with a different level of government, and partnerships are the way to go. At any given time, we may be partnering with the Nova Scotia Salmon Association. That's a group that we have done a lot of work over the years. We're doing more and more with the Shattycamp River Association, electrofishing, a variety of things. We're even sharing the equipment this year. We went splits and share the cost of purchasing electrofishing equipment and having our people trained. So that's another good example of cutting your costs in half for accomplishing things. We're working with the Atlantic Salmon Federation. Both the Shattycamp River and the Margaree River have been included in the Wild Salmon Watershed project that they're rolling out, and we look forward to participating in that. The Unamaki Institute of Natural Resources, they've worked with us on different projects, and we also always welcome their First Nations involvement. What can I say? We've been partnering with people for decades, long before I began here probably. And as you mentioned, it seems when we look at building partnerships and building relationships, the Margaree Salmon Association seems to be doing that now,
Your field staff don't just work on the river and its tributaries, but they contribute in a big way to the community at large. Roadside cleanup, trash management, beautification of areas along the river, some community building maintenance. I get questions sometimes as to who does this work, and I'm always pleased to tell the people who's responsible. Do you get feedback from the public?
Yes, we do. We get a lot of positive feedback. We are a conservation group, and we are focused on habitat and enhancing the populations of salmon and trout. But in addition to that, we're also an active group in the community. If you want to accomplish things, there's nothing more important than relationships. If you have something that someone else needs, then it's time to share those resources. And that's the way we look at things, and that's what we do. We have a crew that are trained in habitat restoration, but they're also very capable of doing any number of jobs. I'll give you an example. After a recent hurricane that came through the Margarees, might have been 4 years ago, I can't recall the name, all of the poplar trees at the local library area were blown over. And, the library doesn't have a lot of individuals on strength or whatever that could deal with that problem. And we discussed it with them. So our crew, over the just 3 or 4 days, managed to cut all of those trees and have them all removed. And the library were very pleased with that. It's community work that we feel that we can do without interfering with their other work. So it's a good opportunity to work with the community.
Yeah, it really works for everybody.
Yeah.
What you do for the river, the salmon, and the community is wonderful. You have a website, a newsletter, and you use social media to get the message out. I still find there is a lack of understanding of the resource, its situation, and what it takes to keep abreast of the challenges. For example, I was told by at least 4 people in the last 2 months that they had a wonderful meal of wild Atlantic salmon in a restaurant. Well, I challenged them, but I don't think I walked away convinced that it was possible to get the message across that you can't buy wild Atlantic salmon in Atlantic Canada. It's illegal to serve it. I just wonder what else we can do. We do a heck of a lot. But what else can we do to get the message out to the general public about wild Atlantic salmon and how important it is to nature, to our environment, and to all of us?
There certainly are mixed messages out there. I'd say number one, some of us feel very passionate about Atlantic salmon, wild Atlantic salmon, enhancing their habitat, promoting increased populations of Atlantic salmon. They're certainly an admirable species. They're great to fish for, but they're great in your environment as well. They're a key species in your environment. If you look at a fish, you have to appreciate what makes that fish spawn in the Margaree and then have their offspring go all the way to Greenland, only to come back 2 or 3 later and spawn in the same place where they were born. Like, back to science, like who can explain that? There's a number of explanations, but who really knows? With wild salmon, the mixed messages are, now we have fish that are being bred in hatchery, in closed nets, enclosed nets, in captivity out in the ocean or along the shores of the ocean. And in some cases, those fish are being referred to as wild fish. Man thinks that they can identify what a wild fish is and what a wild fish isn't, but I think that at times the definition becomes blurred and confused. The wild fish, as you mentioned, that you purchase around here, it's probably Western fish. And when we buy it, we think it's Atlantic salmon, but it's not. The farmed fish that we get here, there's a lot of concern about the environment, about how those fish are being farmed, the overcrowding, the potential damage to the environment. So there's a lot written about that. Some government reports say that it's not hurting the environment, but most reports and most research say that the present way that we're farming Atlantic salmon is damaging both the salmon population and the environment. You could look at something as simple as fewer fish in the pens, but then of course farmed fish are going to be more expensive. So, it's all about chasing the dollar.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to continue doing what we're doing, educating and working hard to get the message to the public so they can be informed. And as a result, when I say we, conservation organizations, go to the government looking for funding, that at least the politicians know that those who they represent have an indication of what is really happening out there?
I go back to the confusion issue. If I look back at the recent symposium, the Atlantic Salmon Provincial Symposium, I was at maybe a week ago. We had government departments there that were saying they're growing wild Atlantic salmon in cook captivity pens out in the ocean. So, like, I don't know how we can represent salmon that are grown in captivity as being wild, and this goes back to the confusion. You know, if we look at NASCO in New England, they're now classifying per or fry that are hatched in hatcheries as natural salmon. So, you know, it's another semantics that we're talking about. Is a natural salmon a wild salmon? Like, it's very confusing.
Yeah, we have to work on getting the communications correct in that regard too, so that public can be properly educated. Well, thank you, Bill, for coming to help us spread the word and tell us what the Margaree Salmon Association does for Atlantic salmon and for our communities through which the world-renowned Margaree River flows. For those who wish to donate and help Atlantic salmon, you can do so by going to the Margaree Salmon Association's website at www.margareesalmon.ca. All you got to do is just hit the yellow donate button at the top of the homepage. And thank you to our listeners. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can stay up to date. And remember, subscribing to Highland Waves is free. Our thought for today is by Robert Swan, who said, "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." So long for now, Pat.